Welcome to Issues. As you know, Issues is a program that deals with what's happening in Bermuda. This evening, we're very happy to have with us the Speaker of the House, Randy Horton. And he also is a host to someone else who is here in Bermuda, but he will tell us about that individual. Mr. Speaker, welcome.
Right, thank you, Richard. It's good to be here.
Good. Now, you are hosting a very special person in Bermuda. Could you share some information about that individual?
That's right, Richard. Of course, it's my pleasure to be hosting the Secretary General of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. And for those who may not know, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association is the organization that provides support to parliaments all around the Commonwealth in assisting in improving democratic governance in our countries.
Okay, now, and the reason for him being in Bermuda?
He's here in order to pass on the message, and particularly to young people. There are some in the Commonwealth, of the 2 billion people in the Commonwealth, 60% of those people are 30 years or younger, which speaks to the importance of us sharing our information with young people. As a result, the Secretary General has initiated a roadshow called the CPA Roadshow, where he has already been to several countries. He's been in Bangladesh, he's been in New Zealand, he's been in Guyana, he's been in Montserrat, he's been in England, in London, and in Scotland, sharing the good word of the work of the Commonwealth Parliament Association, and also just the work of parliaments within those countries. Mm-hmm.
Now, during his visit here, has he just been with you in your office?
Not at all. In fact, I've never worked so hard. Since the Secretary General has been here, Richard, you saw us, in fact, our first visit to a school was at the Bermuda Institute.
Yes.
And since the Bermuda Institute, we've also been to several other schools. We've been, first of all, to the Youth Parliament. Today we saw students at the Berkeley Institute and Salters Grammar School. And then tomorrow we'll be visiting another school. So we are out just spreading this word amongst young people to get them better informed about how their Parliament works. And then his real kind of focus is on the Commonwealth, having young people understand, what is this Commonwealth? What does it mean how are we a part of the Commonwealth? And importantly, I think the message that Secretary General Akbar Khan brings is the importance of parliaments across the Commonwealth working together in order to improve our governance.
Thank you.
And in order to be even more so, being better representatives of the people who put us in Parliament.
My last question. Yes. Have you had an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to call on Mr. Khan for any reason at all in your position as Speaker?
Well, absolutely. I say maybe not Mr. Khan specifically, but certainly the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. I've been very closely associated with it. I've attended many conferences. I've made presentations at conference in relation to certain topics that I'm passionate about. Just my connect with the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association has been very, very positive and very helpful in terms of my effectiveness in the House of Assembly.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You've heard the introduction of the host, Mr. Speaker. Right now, we will turn and we will speak to Mr. Akbar Khan. Mr. Khan, welcome to Issues. We heard Speaker Horton talk about how hard he has been working, so I guess this has been kind of a vacation for you.
Well, it's been an education for me, Richard, and I want to thank you for inviting me to talk about the work of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. We have been working hard, but it's very important to work hard because we need to work hard to engage our young people in democracy. And so the invitation I received from Speaker Horton to come here was to talk to young people and to also engage with the CPA branch, of which Mr. Horton, Speaker Horton, and also the President of the Senate are joint presidents of our branch here in Bermuda. So it's been a great privilege and honour, and so far I'm halfway through my visit now. We have spoken to a number of young people and 3 schools. I also had the privilege yesterday of engaging with the recent or new members of the Youth Parliament, who will be continuing a number of sessions. And that's been a very exciting opportunity because Youth Parliament and local Youth Parliament are really the tools to sow the seeds of engagement about the role of Parliament and to engage young people. And that's building further on what we ask schools to do in terms of their civics, and building the values of a vibrant and dynamic democracy.
Now, as you've been around to the various schools and you've met with the Youth Parliament, as you interact with the young people, are they very similar to young people across the Commonwealth?
Well, there are similarities and differences. The differences are, of course, that young people are very aware of their local situation in terms of wherever I've gone to, and they've asked very important local questions of the parliamentarians who have attended these roadshows. Because the essence of the roadshow is about connecting parliamentarians back into the communities and engaging young people. So it's been very, very useful to hear the young people in Bermuda, in the schools we have attended, talk about some of the local issues here in Bermuda. But what is similar to all of the young people that I have visited and talked to across the Commonwealth is the fact that they are very well informed about the world in which we live. So we have recurring themes and questions around global warming, climate change. We have issues around human rights. We have issues around inequality and poverty. And we have issues around how we manage immigration as well. And these are issues which very clear to me young people are interested about, and it matters to them on a global perspective, but they need to orientate that within a local context to find answers. And that's where these roadshows are really important, because they're asking their parliamentarians to engage on these issues. So I mean, one question, for example, we had today, which is an international question, but it also has a local impact, is what is the impact of Brexit of the United Kingdom and the EU on Bermuda? And you know, that shows a very high awareness from our young people about the environment, the current political context in which Bermuda is engaging with the United Kingdom. So I've been very, very humbled and fascinated by all of the roadshows, but also of the high awareness that young people have.
Yeah. I can recall one of the questions you asked at Bermuda Institute in terms of what is democracy. And I remember this young man says, it's an illusion of choice. And I said, wow. In fact, I didn't know if he understood what he was saying. So I called him over. I said, well, what do you mean? It says where people think that they're making the choice, but really they're not. Now, as you look at politics throughout the Commonwealth, and even in the United States now, we hear Mr. Trump saying things are rigged. But as you look across the Commonwealth, do we really have, as the elector, as those who do the election, do we really have freedom of choice in terms of choosing our parliamentarian? Or somehow is the political system rigged, to use Mr. Trump's word, in such a way that a particular person and a particular party wins? Or is our election process, is it free from contamination?
Well, I think, taking the last point first, I don't think there's any system that is free from contamination. And then that is really about the importance of putting the safeguards in to ensure that elections are free and fair, and also what parliamentarians are doing, transparent and open for the public to see. And this raises the question about scrutiny. and it raises the importance of Parliament in its role of representation and opening its doors and providing the necessary transparency in its dealings that ordinary citizens can relate to and expect of our parliamentarians and our parliaments. So there's always a risk of contamination. There's always a risk of things going wrong in elections. It's really about the importance of putting in place the checks and balances and making sure that procedures are rigorous, they're transparent, they're open to the best of our abilities. And I'm very pleased in that context that the CPA established in 2006 a set of standards for parliaments across our Commonwealth, representing the diversity of our Commonwealth and also the complexity and size of many of our Commonwealth parliaments. But these are a set of standards which are aspirational, but they are standards which we ask our parliaments to meet in terms of what an effective parliament looks like. And we were doing this 10 years ago now. Bermuda took up that challenge under Dame Jennifer Smith and formed a joint select committee which looked at how the Bermuda Parliament, which is one of the oldest in the world and certainly the oldest in this part of the world, and democracy has been the habit of Bermuda since 1620,
Yes.
has taken up that challenge and has looked at its practices, has reflected on how it's worked, and has come out with a report about certain steps to strengthen governance, to strengthen oversight, and to perform more effectively in the 21st century. And my understanding from Speaker Horton and others is that parties across the divide have come together to agree that report, and now we are looking to the Bermuda Parliament passing legislation which represents a separation of powers and best practice. So I'm very pleased about that. And so what we see here is about a parliament strengthening its good governance. And that is a message from the CPA for all of our parliaments. Parliaments cannot stand still. They are at a central point in society where they reach into all the branches of the executive, they reach into political parties, they reach into the public. And because of the centrality of Parliament in society, it is absolutely essential that parliaments continue to evolve and meet the demands of the people they claim to serve. And that means it's constantly refining and honing democracy within the local jurisdiction and towards international standards.
Here's another question. You said the parliamentarians, those elected, they're representatives, or they represent their electorate. Here's my question. If the politician has a certain belief and his electorate, those who put him there, have a different opinion, when he sits in the parliament to make a vote, who does he vote? What does he vote? What his constituency is saying, or what he or she believes in his heart?
Well, I think it's a very interesting question, and I think it's one which many of our parliamentarians face on a very frequent basis. One of the fundamental points about our parliamentary democracy is that we elect representatives to our parliaments or legislatures or assemblies, as we may call them, depending on our jurisdiction. We don't send delegates. Delegates are required to do exactly as members of the public require them to do. Representatives are elected on the basis of certain promises called a manifesto, but we also elect them to exercise a relationship of trust with the electorate to make the best decisions on behalf of the people they serve. So they are placed in a position of trust as representatives, and therefore it is incumbent on them to be mindful of what the electorate is saying, but also to be mindful of what is the mood of the country, and also to be mindful of what are the promises which have been made, and to exercise their best judgment in the interests of the people in which they serve in Parliament. Now, there are issues, of course, where there are matters of conscience. And it's not only in terms of listening to the electorate as to what way to vote, it's also about the party political machine. Because the party political machine, of course, has a chief whip
Yes,
or
yes.
an enforcer, shall we
Yes.
say. And often I think I've spoken to members of Parliament who find themselves actually at idem with their members of their electorate, but actually at odds with their party. And in those situations, I think there are some real challenges for members of Parliament as to which way they're going to go. But they are faced with having to make the best decision in the circumstances.
Yeah. And I truly appreciate that answer because many times as I listen to the news, both locally here in Bermuda and throughout the world, people are saying, well, you know, I put that man there, I put that woman there, he or she's not representing what I want. But if I'm listening to you, there are some instances where the politician, the individual elected, has to make a choice and hopefully makes the best choice. So I appreciate that.
Just to come back, if I may, Richard, on that point. I mean, one needs to bear in mind also that members of Parliament, where they serve a constituency, need to serve the constituency as a whole. And that will include the differing views of those who may not have voted for them.
Yes.
And so it isn't a straight choice of, you know, I represent only and vote only in the manner in which of those who have voted for me. Mm-hmm. It is, in fact, a much broader decision based on the best interests of your constituents as a whole. Yeah. And for the country in many cases where there are big questions around, you know, issues of the economy, housing, education. There's very large issues which are impacting more broadly in policy rather than simply within a particular locality.
Yeah. I truly appreciate that answer. I think that's a point of education, and hopefully any politician that's watching this program and even the constituency of Bermuda will understand that when we elect a person, there are times when that person may not represent our view, but he or she is surely representing somebody else's view. So we need to be aware of that. Thank you, Mr. Khan. We'll come right back with some additional questions. Welcome back. Previously, we were talking with Akbar Khan, the Secretary General of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. That's a mouthful. As we listened to him, we heard something that to me was really an education. As we elect our parliamentary representative, we need to be aware that they may not only represent our belief, but they may represent the belief of others in the constituency. Therefore, when we say, well, we elected Mary or we elected John, he's not representing me. That may be so, but he or she is definitely representing an individual or individuals in the constituency. Now we have with us Mrs. Lucy Pickles. Mrs. Pickles, please share with us what is your title, because you're here with the Secretary General.
Thank you. So I'm the Assistant Private Secretary to the Secretary General, and I'm also Assistant Director of Programmes. Oh. And one of the CPA's key functions is to ensure that, or work towards, one of the key functions of our parliaments, which is as a representative body. And as Mr. Khan talked to, he mentioned how important it was that our parliaments represent all sectors of society, which includes women. Women make up 50% of the world's population, and yet they are chronically underrepresented in parliaments across the Commonwealth. So what the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association has done is to make this one of its priorities to increase the representation of women in parliaments across the Commonwealth, which really mirrors what the Commonwealth heads of government have said, which was a target of 30% representation of women across parliaments in the Commonwealth.
Do you have any idea what it is now?
Well, there are 52 countries in the Commonwealth at the moment, and only 12 of those countries have reached that target, which is pretty disappointing, and it demonstrates that there's an enormous amount of work to do to increase the representation of women in parliaments.
As you travel around with Mr. Khan to the various countries and territories in the Commonwealth, are you finding somehow that in the various societies, women do not have an equal status as that of men?
I think in some cases that's the situation, but I think there are many barriers to women's political participation. One of those is the role that the media often plays. Women often get a very, very difficult time in the media. often the focus is what a woman is wearing or what colour lipstick she has on, rather than actually the quality of her work and the message that she is sending and the political, ideological standpoint that she's coming from. So it's really about orientating people towards the content of what she's saying and the results of her work, rather than how attractive she might be. But it's also, I mean, one of the things that we're very keen on doing is making Parliament more accessible to women. And there have been many things that parliaments have done across the Commonwealth to make it more accessible and friendly to both genders. So in some cases, Parliament has changed its sitting hours to make it more family friendly, so that women who have children are able to be a mum and a parliamentarian. That's just one example. Another is ensuring that, believe it or not, there are female washrooms in a parliament, which in some parliaments that didn't exist. So it's just a way of sensitising parliaments to make them more gender sensitive and gender equal.
Mm-hmm. Even though the process is slow, do you sense that the various parliaments want to include more women, or as you go around, do you find them putting up more barriers for women being represented in the parliament?
I don't think there's one answer to that. Lots of parliaments have different approaches, and there are different attitudes to gender across the Commonwealth. But I guess the Commonwealth heads of government made a commitment to increase gender representation in parliaments. And so really what we have to focus on is the positives. Mm-hmm. Just wanted to go back to the number of parliaments across the Commonwealth that have achieved this 30% target, and just to highlight a beacon of light, which is Rwanda, which has achieved actually over 50% representation of women in parliament, which is a huge achievement and is something that we should all look to. But also, parliaments and governments have made they've employed lots of different techniques to increase gender representation. It might be the introduction of quotas or temporary quotas in some cases to augment the number of women in parliament.
Let me ask you about that, quotas, because there are times that various individuals have problem with quotas in terms of setting a certain number. Do you see that quotas maybe forcing an electorate to do something that they may not want, in terms of educating them where they're freely say, listen, we need more women, as compared to setting a quota and the government is saying, you must reach this limit?
I think there's an element of that in some jurisdictions, but I think we're facing actually a situation where women have such low levels of representation that sometimes you need to have these measures in place to give women a chance. It is only every parliamentary term often that women have the chance to fight for a seat in Parliament. So really, that comes around in many cases once every 5 years. So this is a really sort of long-term challenge that we face. And if in cases where quotas are used as a temporary measure to increase the number of women in Parliament so that they can prove that they can be an effective representative of the people, I think, it's often a tool that is used that is very successful and is accepted by society.
Okay. We have been talking with Lucy Pickles, the private secretary to the Secretary General, and we've heard her view in terms of women representative, a view that I share. And hopefully, as we in Bermuda look to increasing those numbers of women in our parliament, hopefully we will do that. I should have asked the Speaker what percentage of women are represented here in the Bermuda Parliament. I don't know what his answer would be.
I think it's a bicameral parliament. Yeah. In the Senate, there is over 50% of women represented.
In our Senate. Yeah.
However, in the House of Assembly, we have 8, I think, out of 36 members. So there's a little bit of progress to be made there, but probably moving in the right direction.
Did you hear that, Bermuda? 8 out of 36. But hopefully we will move in the right direction. We will be right back with Mr. Khan. Welcome back. We're continuing our conversation with Akbar Khan. Mr. Khan, as I did some research, I'm seeing 52, 53 countries in the Commonwealth. Mm-hmm. Which is correct?
Well, until very recently, Richard, maybe about 2-3 weeks ago, we were 53 members of the Commonwealth. 3 weeks ago, or approximately 3 weeks ago, the government of the Republic of the Maldives decided to withdraw from the Commonwealth. And as of now, we are now 52 members following that withdrawal from the government of the Maldives.
Okay. Another question. You have small countries and you have large countries. Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of representation and the vote when they meet, the larger countries, do they have a greater say than the smaller countries?
No. We're arranged over 9 regions of the Commonwealth in terms of our parliament. So the membership of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association is approximately 180 parliaments. And just to explain how we get to 180 parliaments with 52 countries, is that we represent not only the national parliaments, we also represent the subnational, regional and territorial parliaments. So our reach is in relation to every elected level of the parliamentary model in a country. Mm-hmm. So, for example, in Australia, which is a federal country, we represent we don't represent the federal government right now, who are not members, but we represent all the state governments. Mm-hmm. Canada, again, federal, we represent federal branch of parliament, but we also represent the states and the territories. So we represent 180 parliaments, of which approximately 17,000 parliamentarians are our members. Now, what does that speak to? It speaks to diversity. And it speaks to a breadth and depth of experience amongst our membership in terms of being able to share ideas, exchange ideas in order to meet common challenges. Because there isn't a problem within our parliamentary, our parliaments across our membership, which has not been faced by another parliament. And that's a really important aspect of peer-to-peer learning and experience within our membership.
Now, in terms of joining the Commonwealth, is that closed now? You just talked about one country dropping out, but can a country choose to join?
Absolutely. And I like
and what
to think
benefits would there be?
Well, I like to think of the Commonwealth as an organisation which has shown that it is, in fact, an organisation which is attractive to those countries which are currently outside, but which may be looking to see what other benefits from the Commonwealth. And in recent times, as you'll know, historically, most of our members, countries of the Commonwealth, have been colonies from the United Kingdom, which have subsequently become independent. Mm. But we have 3 countries which have joined the Commonwealth, which have had no historical relationship with the United Kingdom. And those 3 countries are Cameroon, Mozambique, and Rwanda. 2 of those countries are French-speaking countries, and one of the countries is a Lusophone country, Portuguese-speaking country. So we've had, as the United Kingdom, no relationship with those countries. But they applied, Cameroon and Mozambique applied and joined in 1995, and Rwanda joined in 2009. Now, goes to your question, why would they want to join the Commonwealth? They want to join the Commonwealth because they are in areas of the world, in Africa, where many of our countries are their neighbours. And they look to the mutuality of trade, they look to the commonality of laws, parliamentary democracy, and the benefits of those common features and the unity and our core values of being part of that family in their particular regions. And so Rwanda has joined the Commonwealth, Cameroon and Mozambique, and there are other countries which have expressed a view to join the Commonwealth. Now, that's a matter for the Commonwealth Secretariat, which is the intergovernmental body of the Commonwealth family, but certainly expressions of interest have been made from countries around the world who do have to go through a process. And they do have to go through that process in the sense of wanting to meet our values and our standards. And one of those core values of the Commonwealth is around democracy. And that means that you need to be a country which elects your members of parliament through the free choice of their people. So, giving that as an example, Fiji is a member of the Commonwealth, which, as you may know, fell into military rule. And as a result of military rule, and not having a civilian government, an elected government from the people, but was run through military rule, they were suspended from the Commonwealth. Oh. because they were no longer adhering to our values. And the Commonwealth encouraged Fiji to return to civilian government through the ballot box. And for reasons which I won't go into, but which is public knowledge, it took some time before Fiji got there. And I'm delighted to say that Fiji did eventually hold civilian elections, and there is now a civilian government in place, and Fiji has fully returned to the Commonwealth. And so that's an example of, our values being core to who we are. And what are those other values? Some of those other values are around, as Mrs. Pickles has talked about, gender equality, respect for the rule of law, respect for human dignity, and also separation of powers. It's very important that the executive do not use the legislature as a rubber stamp. Yeah. Very important. And the Commonwealth has what's known as the Latimer House principles, which have been adopted by heads of government for some time now, which sets out the relationship between the three branches of government, which should be independent, but there must be a relationship for government to function. And one of the core aspects of what we are trying to achieve as a parliamentary wing of the Commonwealth is around the independence of Parliament. And the independence of Parliament is reflected through the attributes of Parliament in terms of the Latimer House principles. So we are very keen on ensuring that parliaments have their own parliamentary staff. So these are not staff who are drawn from the wider civil service or can be pulled away into government departments. They're independent, expert parliamentary staff within a parliamentary service. And importantly, linked to that is also Parliament having its own budget. Mm. And this mirrors the independence of the judiciary as well. It should not be for a Parliament to have to go basically bowl in hand to the executive to buy a chair, buy a desk, or do any particular works. Parliament should have its own budget through having allocated funds which are protected for Parliament, and those funds should be used by Parliament, of course subject to oversight of public finances, but Parliament should not be beholden to the executive in the same way that on Latimer House principles, the judiciary should be independent and they should not be beholden to the executive as well.
Okay. As we close, tell us about your rise to the position that you have now. Where were you born? Were you an A student in school? What are some of the different positions you held before becoming Secretary General?
Well, thank you for that opportunity. I won't say I was an A student, but I will say I hope that people will see me as a conscientious student who's tried to embrace the values of the Commonwealth in terms of working hard and being honest and aspiring to the values which we hold dear. And I was born in Guyana, which, as you know, is part of the English-speaking Caribbean on the continent of South America. I grew up as a young lad in Guyana and went to school in Guyana. Then my parents moved to the United Kingdom. And in the United Kingdom, I trained as a barrister, so I was called to the English bar. And then I also trained at the New York bar, so I'm admitted to the New York bar. So I studied at the University of Reading, I studied English law, I studied at the University of Cambridge, Jesus College International Law, and I also studied in New York to qualify at the New York bar. So I practiced at the English bar in international law. I then joined the United Nations as an international lawyer, and I served in the United Nations in Geneva. I also, in the humanitarian field of international law, I also served in the Palestinian territories in Gaza during the Second Intifada in 2000 to 2002. And I returned to the United Kingdom and I joined Her Majesty's Diplomatic Service as a legal advisor and was fortunate to have the opportunity to become the UK legal advisor to the international tribunals in The Hague. So I was the UK legal advisor to the International Criminal Court and to the ad hoc tribunals in The Hague, and also to the International Court of Justice, which is the principal UN organ. And in those roles, I represented Her Majesty's government before various legal committees and also in relation to legal matters before the court. And in those tribunals, of course, these are international tribunals which deal with some of the most atrocious crimes which have been committed, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and also some of the most complex international issues. And then I returned to the United Kingdom. I had the good fortune to take over as legal advisor, advising on the overseas territories. So I had the good fortune of being able to advise on some matters relating to Bermuda and to get to know the Bermuda Constitution, some of the issues in Bermuda and other overseas territories. And then I transferred and became the UK co-chair of the contact group, the international contact group addressing piracy off the coast of Somalia. Oh. And so I dealt with quite a lot of the work, bringing together, building a consensus of international countries to fight the scourge of piracy, which has blighted Somalia and many of the other countries in that region. Now, along the way, I had the opportunity for 3 years of being the chief legal advisor to the Commonwealth Secretariat and to the Secretary General, who has just departed, Secretary General Sharma. And I served in that role as chief legal advisor, and that was my first opportunity to really understand the complexity of the Commonwealth and to see the real value of the brand of the Commonwealth to our member states. And I have to say that when you sit in headquarters and you're so away from what in fact is happening on the ground, that when you travel and you have the opportunity to go to countries and to engage in legal matters, as I was engaging in at those times, and building the capacity of our small member states in terms of their legal work and their judiciary, and also in relation to being able to cooperate in mutual legal assistance and in other areas of international cooperation to fight transnational crime and to other scourges which affect us on a global level. It's incredibly humbling to see the value that the Commonwealth actually has on the ground to small developing countries, but also how welcome the Commonwealth is within a community which really embraces those values and is part of a family. And that enriched my experience to come back to the Commonwealth. And when I had the opportunity to run as Secretary General of the CPA, which was last October, it was an opportunity to contribute again to the Commonwealth, but within the parliamentary wing of the Commonwealth.
Is it an elected or an appointed position?
It's an appointed position. We went through quite a rigorous appointment process. Each region, as I said, we have 9 regions within our Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. Each region was asked to put up a candidate for appointment, and I was fortunate to be chosen by the British Island Mediterranean region, of which I'm currently a British national. And the next stage was for the 9 candidates from the 9 regions to compete. And from the 9 regions, the next process reduced the 9 candidates to 3 candidates. And I then came before a panel of parliamentarians representing each of the regions to set out my vision of what the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association should be for the next 4 years and to what I could bring to the role of Secretary General. And the panel, the interview panel, made a recommendation, and that's their position, to recommend to the General Assembly which candidate should be appointed. And so the recommendation was that I should be appointed, and that was ratified by the General Assembly.
Do you find that your background in law might have given you the edge over others because of your extensive background in the legal aspects?
Well, I certainly think I can't speak for the other candidates, as I'm sure they were meritorious. I certainly didn't know them or their background, but they did compete and they did get through to the last round with me. But I think as a lawyer, one understands the constitutional frameworks, and one understands the importance of the separation of powers and the role that Parliament has within the constitutional settlement of a country. And of course, it's no coincidence, I think, that many members of Parliament happen to be lawyers, and also many parliamentary staff and clerk happen to have a legal background. And so I do think if you are a lawyer by training, you do find yourself exposed to constitutional law. You do find yourself exposed to concepts around democracy and the importance of Parliament as a lawmaking body and a supreme body within the context of the Constitution. And so that has certainly helped me, I think, in terms of my orientation of parliamentary work and understanding how parliaments work and their function. But I think particularly, which has been important to me, as a member of Her Majesty's Diplomatic Service and as a legal advisor in government, I have worked very closely with parliamentarians and also ministers. I've also given evidence before select committees in the House of the Parliament in the United Kingdom. And being an interface to how parliamentarians work on the work of the House, in the role that I have occupied at the Foreign Office, and having to help and work with parliamentarians and to give evidence has given me a very, very good insight into the works of Parliament, certainly within the Westminster model, but also my earlier work as Chief Legal Advisor to the Commonwealth Secretariat helped me to understand the diversity in the Commonwealth, the complexities, and also the unevenness of development as well, and the needs of many of our member states.
Let me ask you another question, and we have gone over time, but we thought that this topic was important enough to go a little bit longer. You mentioned the Westminster model. Mm-hmm. As you compare the Westminster model with probably that in the United States, are there some benefits? Would you see them as equal? To what degree would you and could you compare them? Or is it unfair to compare those two systems?
Well, I think it is. I mean, to some extent, it's a false dichotomy, if I put it that way, in the sense that I think, the Westminster model has been born out of the traditions of a particular locality and a particular tradition, in the same way that the US system has born out of its needs and its requirements. And so I don't think it's really fair to compare them. It's sort of comparing apples and pears. I think what's important is that whichever model that one looks at, all of these models, whichever parliamentary model one has adopted, and within the Commonwealth, we have actually, as we have in Bermuda, we have a bicameral model which reflects very closely the Westminster model of two houses, an appointed upper house, elected lower house. But in other parts of the Commonwealth, it's only one house, a unicameral house. And there is also a modification, let's say, of the Westminster model into an executive presidency, for example, in Guyana. So there are variants. They're not one-size-fits-all model across our Commonwealth. That being said, I think, it's incumbent really on parliaments, whatever model, whether you be the US model, two elected houses, or whether you have a bicameral model in the UK, in our Commonwealth, or a unicameral model, it's for Parliament to always meet the needs of its society and to be always striving to strengthen that governance and to reach out and to be the institution which is effective to meet the needs of its people. And that means, looking at practices, the way Ms. Pickles talked about, the importance of gender equality and higher representation of women in Parliament, for Parliaments to modernise and to be thinking about the needs of its people and the expectations and demands. Because certainly today we have the Sustainable Development Goals, which have been agreed by the United Nations. 194 countries have come together, of which all of our 52 countries are there, have agreed on the need to have a development agenda based on 17 goals, which must be delivered by our governments by 2030, so that no one's left behind. Now, when one takes that, one talks, Goal 16 specifically talks about public institutions being effective. And when we look at that in the context of parliamentary democracy, we look at Parliament as being that institution which is tasked with delivering those 17 goals through legislation, through monitoring and tracking, to make sure that the benefits of those goals are translated for its people. Now, many parliaments need to see how they can modernize themselves, reform themselves, and make adjustments so that they are effective institutions to develop those goals. So that's really what it's about. It's about being responsive, it's about being inclusive, being participatory, and being the institution which is effective to meet the needs of your people.
Okay. We have been talking with Akbar Khan, Secretary General for the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. He has given us a world of knowledge, and we truly appreciate that. We also met with Lucy Pickles, the private secretary, and we talked about women's representation throughout the Commonwealth. And we started off with our own very speaker, Speaker Horton, and he told us of the purpose of this visit. In fact, it's my understanding that Speaker Horton invited Mr. Khan here to Bermuda, and truly we've appreciated that. Speaker Horton and others in the Parliament here in Bermuda have traveled around Bermuda to various schools and various appointments with Mr. Khan and Ms. Pickles, and we truly appreciate their visit here in Bermuda. And we look forward to seeing you next time on Issues.